Ewan McGregor and Albert Finney each realize expertly charming performances, both playing the same character, Edward Bloom, in his youth, as well as in his final days. In Big Fish, this is a 2003 film directed by Tim Burton, and it's today's review. This is March on Demand. I'm taking your request. This request comes from Kid77. Thank you very much for this recommendation. I haven't seen this movie in a while. I actually hadn't seen it since it was in theaters, so this was very fun coming back to this movie because it's definitely different than a lot of Tim Burton movies, but at the same time, kind of the same. So there's it's kind of two halves to it, where it feels sort of like a down to earth film, but then it also is kind of a larger than life, wacky, over the top kind of adventure that feels very much more Tim Burton-y. And maybe its biggest fault is that it has a lot of fun in those big, larger-than-life sequences, but maybe there's a little bit to be demanded of the more down-to-earth stuff. But it's still a very good movie, I'd say, and kind of what it really is all about. Of course, it is about a father and son, so their relationship. The father, played by Albert Finney in his older years, and in his younger years, Ewan McGregor. He has an endless amount of tall tales, and he shares them with anyone who will listen, basically. And the son kind of gets a little bit sick of it, but at the same time, when he is kind of confronting that, his father is coming to the end of his life, he's sick, he's dying, he starts to look back at these stories and in some way kind of piece together his life through these stories. And we as the audience kind of do the same. And I think it does reach, in some ways, profound levels, because there's always going to be those moments in life where maybe we're gathered at the Christmas table, what have you, and there's that empty seat, and it's occupied no longer by a person but by stories, and in that sense, a person, though they may have left us, they kind of live forever through those stories, sharing these funny anecdotes about knowing them, things like that, little funny things that you might remember. Maybe they're really elaborate stories that are, have an important part in their life. Maybe they're little tiny, weird, kind of quirky things, and this movie kind of has that all. So I think it touches upon that in a pretty moving way, in that maybe this character has the foresight of knowing that he's not going to live forever, not so much telling these stories to make himself seem great, but to give a gift, a lifelong processed, manufactured, assembled gift for his son to kind of move along the family tradition and stuff like that. So it's touching in that way, and I think the stories, they are entertaining. It does amount to one large narrative where we see silly things happening, kind of like the very first thing we learn is about his birth, Edward Bloom's birth, where he pops out of the vagina and slides through the whole hallway of the hospital, and that kind of sets up the wacky nature of these adventures. And he's in his youth a big shot in his town, on all the school sports teams. We see him playing baseball, we see him playing football and basketball and all that good stuff. And he finally goes on an adventure with a giant, played by, who is that actor's name? I wonder if it's Robert Guillaume, who is also in House of the Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects, playing the giant. He's great. And kind of getting sidetracked along the way, finding, a strange town called Spectre, which may or may not be purgatory. I'm not sure. Meeting characters along the way, meeting a strange poet played by Steve Buscemi, meeting circus owner played by Danny DeVito, who's also a robot, and has a little henchman played by Deep Roy, who we'd later see, of course, in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And of course, meeting the woman of his life, played in his youth, played by Alison Pill, and in the later years, played by Jessica Lange. Also, too, really good performances. Jessica Lange, in particular, really great, playing his wife. and just kind of the adventures go. He goes off to war. He meets Siamese twins, and all this stuff. And I'll say, I mean, maybe there's spoilers in this review, but it's just such a weird combination of things that altogether they do make up this kind of fantastical Tim Burton-y type of movie. So you can see why a director like Burton would be attracted to it. But at the same time, you do absolutely kind of think when they have to go back to the real life sequences where we have Albert Finney and we have his son, played by Billy Crudup, and he has his wife, played by Marion Cotillard, and they're getting together, they're meeting him. You can almost just sense, like, Tim Burton must be like, can we make the scene go faster? I want to get back to the fun stuff, you know? So maybe that's problematic. Because I'll say Albert Finney's performance, brilliant. He was nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor. I think he should have got an Oscar nomination, too. It's a really commanding performance, and you kind of hang on his every word because, unlike the Billy Crudup character, we haven't heard these stories a million times before, so we are fascinated by them. And Ewan McGregor might be my favorite Ewan McGregor performance, actually. Well, aside from Trainspotting, I guess. Can't be Trainspotting, you know? He's just almost... I was watching it again recently, and I was like, you know, he's kind of doing like a sort of a Matthew McConaughey impression. So there's that. But he's really both of them are really charming and just these warm and inviting characters. I think they do such a great job. And we also have Helena Bonham-Carter in the cast, of course. It's a Tim Burton movie. You got to have her, right? She's good in playing two different roles, which may or may not be the same person. She's a witch, but she's also a woman who's holding out in that town specter from selling her place, and he's trying to fix up the place, and we kind of think, well, is he having an affair with her? We don't really know. And that's one thing I'll say about this movie. You can go through it, and I was kind of going through it again, watching this again all these years later, kind of thinking, you know, how do I take these fantasy things and how do I kind of make them work so that they are actually real life stories? How do I interpret them to be this real characters, real life, and not this weird fantasy stuff? Which I think, at the end of it all, it's a fruitless endeavor. I'll tell you, because I mean, though there are hints here and there of, you know, sort of seeing revelations. Like we see at the end, of course, all these characters that he was talking about, they are actually real and they come into play. They go to the funeral and things like that. But to really kind of piece it together, to make sense of it, I think is kind of besides the point. Altogether, it is more about just telling this grand tale, exaggerating his life and making it seem like this grand thing. And most important of all, the way he tells the story, he captures at least how he feels during those times. So it's about the father's feelings in his life and how he establishes that through the fantasy, basically. So I think that's really what it's all about. And Ewan McGregor, great in the role. Maybe the weak point, probably I'd say Billy Crudup a little bit. Like, it's a thankless role, it really is. I mean, you got so much else going on. You have this wide variety of colorful characters. You have a dual role played by Albert Finney, played by Ewan McGregor. But then here you have to have the straight-laced, you know, down-to-earth son character, and there's no fun to be had for the character. And Billy Crudup, I mean, he's done some kind of wacky roles in the past, so this is kind of a restricted performance where he just kind of has to be just this normal kind of guy. So it feels like a restricted performance, and I think at the very end, where he finally does kind of go along with his father's method of telling these grand stories, I don't think the performance is quite convincing in doing that. I don't, and that kind of makes it suffer a little bit. So I mean, there's good and bad to the movie. It is, you know, if you try to analyze it and try to connect every, you know, fantastical thing to real life, you're not gonna be satisfied in any way. But if you just enjoy it for what it is, which finally at the halfway point, I'm like, okay, I just got to enjoy it as it is. It is quite a good movie, and it's, you know, full of fun, adventure, romance. It is a beautiful love story above it all, not just in the youth, and we see him trying to woo the girl, but in their older days, there's that great scene where he's like, I'm all dried up, and then he gets into the bathtub, and Jessica Lange goes right in there with him, and at the end it was so sweet. You know, there's sort of like a well, not subplot, but just this kind of aside to the movie where the inspector in this magical town where everything's great, it's not too warm, it's not too cold, blah 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 blah. Don't wear your shoes. There's a river where it shows you what you want most in life, and of course that woman I mean that thing is his wife, his love, his all. And at the end when he's bringing when Billy Crudup was carrying the father into the river at the end where he would become the big fish, of course, who's there? His wife. He's like, my lady on the water. And I thought that was sweet. It hits sweet enough notes where you can kind of ignore certain parts of the plot that don't all come together, and you're trying to scramble your brain and figure it out, but that's not the point. It's all about feelings, it's all about emotions, and I think that's where it hits the most importantly, and that's where it hits the most effectively, and that's where it works the absolute best. So I think it's a good movie. I'm glad to have revisited it again. Again, a great cast. Again, Ewan Mcgregor is perfect in this role. Albert Finney also perfect. It was great seeing Marion Cotillard. Apparently this is her first American film, which is kind of cool. And speaking of which, this is actually, from what IMDb tells me, this is the feature film debut of Miley Cyrus. She plays one of the kids at the beginning of the movie where they're visiting the witch. And it has that guy from The Office. Will he ever get the girl? Pam's fiance, whatever. I love The Office. Anyway, Big Fish. Definitely check it out if you haven't already, even though I kind of spoiled it. But, you go into it knowing that the father's going to die at the end. It's all about the stories and the journey and the life and love in between. What can I tell you? So thank you very much, Kid77, for your recommendation. I'm still taking your requests for March on Demand. I'm going to leave a link to the video below. Let me know what you want me to review. In the meantime, be sure to give me a thumbs up. That'd be great. Comment, rate, subscribe, all that good stuff. Visit Derek237.com. And until next time, I'll see you later.